Thank you all for joining us today. This is our third installment of our automotive dealership response to the COVID-19 crisis with live Q&A. My name is Tara and I will be moderating today's webinar. Please be advised that we are welcoming questions during and after the webinar. If you have a question, please utilize the chat feature in Zoom. You can either send your question to the group chat or choose to send me your question privately. We will address specific questions to the content covered during the presentation and hold general questions until the end. With that, today's webinar is hosted by Rosenfield and Company and Shuker Dorris. Our presenters are managing partner Ken Rosenfield, Adam Rosenfield, and Scott Shuker from Shuker Dorris. I will now turn it over to Ken.
Thank you for joining us in our third presentation. As a firm, I'd like to welcome Scott Shuker of Shuker Dorris. Scott's an old-time friend of our firm, and although he's known for some very well-known bankruptcy cases, he's also really good at dealing with distressed creditors and helping clients of ours and his clients in dealing with renegotiating contracts in challenging times and helping his clients out to not just be in bankruptcy, to avoid bankruptcy and also work in challenging times to get us through these challenging times. So, thank you, Scott, for joining us with this. I'd also like to introduce Adam Rosenfield, who I've known a long time as well. And Adam's been leading our charge with our team and our firm, along with another partner of ours, Jan Dahlman, who I'd like to thank as well, and Dama Hergner, and other staff in our firm, who've really done an amazing job in putting together loan packages for our clients. And we put together a very intuitive form to what to do next. And that's what this is going to be about. So thank you guys for that. We're very proud of our team that's done the work in that regard. So I'd like to start out a little bit about what we're seeing now that the first round of the payroll program has gone through, and kind of share some statistics with you, and then some best practices that some of our clients are doing, and some other ideas of how to start navigating through this round now that a lot of our clients have been funded or they're looking to be funded in this next round. So we could start with the next slide, please. And where'd the loans go? They're really meant for small businesses, which is companies under 500 people. As some of you are well aware, some very well-known companies have received some of these fundings, some publicly held companies. One of them has actually given some money back. Shake Shack, as you might have known, has given $10 million back under this program already. And actually, I congratulate them for having the forward thinking of letting this money go to small businesses. It wasn't a first come, first serve basis. I can tell you from our firm's standpoint, it was a little bit of a free for all. We had a lot of clients obsessing with this, getting the packages in as quickly as we can. We started on it the first day that we could. We learned a lot about the banks and uploading data and where to go. We put together some packages, and it was quite a challenging time for our team to do that. One of my banking friends, she sent me a SBA deck on where the money went, and where this is published from the SBA. There was 1,035,086 loans made with an average size of $239,000, a little over that. 70% of the loans were under 150,000, and 0.32% of the loans were over 5 million, which is kind of leads to the fact that most of these were small businesses obtaining these loans. The industries were across the board. The big three, which were a little over 11%, we went to construction industry, professional, and healthcare. Today, we're mostly talking about automotive retail, which was actually well behind that number of 11%, which is about a little over 8%. Next slide. So that's where the loans went, and now what really happened. Our clients are national, and it kind of was across the board, where some of our clients would lay off hundreds of their staff, and some of our clients laid off none. So it kind of went across the board from all that. It was interesting to see how everybody reacted to that. Some were totally laid off, some were furloughed. Mostly in the dealerships, mostly in the sales teams. As a percentage of total people laid off, it would have been in the sales forces, some in accounting, and some technicians as well. This did work well. I think will work well some if you're well capitalized to not let off anybody. And we have quite a few clients that did not lay off anybody, and they're continuing to pay their staff. And that's what these loans are for, is to pay your staff. Of those that did keep staff, we're keeping their productive staff and keeping them as busy as possible. If they did obtain the PPP loan, then you actually have free staff for about 2.5 months. So you want to keep them as productive as you can, and the gross profits you're going to be getting from these people will basically fall right to your bottom line. We've also seen some areas where there were pay cuts across the board for many of our clients. They would in the range anywhere from 5 to about 20% or so. We had some clients a little bit more. But overall, the average, if anybody was incurring a pay cut, would be somewhere around the 20% range. For multi-dealership groups, we've actually seen some cross-pollination among some of the stores where maybe some general sales managers or service managers would work different stores, might work 2 or 3 stores instead of working 1 store, because their sales, I think on average was declined about 80%. So it was down significantly. So all of our dealers with more than 1 dealership were cross-pollinating and utilizing staff among different dealerships. And that's actually a good thing as well, giving them some knowledge in other brands or knowledge with other staff, and just trying to work on a multi-dealership type platform where some haven't done that before. So that's a good learning experience for some. Some of our clients have been talking to us about how to stage bringing the staff back as business does increase. And that's, Adam will get into that a little bit later on in the presentation. But we are working with some of our clients how to bring them back on the time when you can. Mostly what we're seeing specifically is for the well-trained staff, and that's the technicians, is keeping them busy. And what they might be doing for flat rate type technicians is if they were, say, generating 50 to 55 hours a week before in flat rate, now they may be generating a small portion of that, is to bring them back, but pay them a guaranteed amount up to what they were earning before. So we are starting to see some of that. We're starting to see some sign-on bonuses and things to bring the staff back. There's an allowance of 25% of the loan balance to be used for other qualified expenses, which would be mortgage interest, rent, and utilities. I know a lot of you have questions as to what's going to constitute mortgage interest, such as floor plan dollars, and whether or not DMS costs would be considered rent or not as well. We are looking into that. And I'll let Scott discuss more about what a real mortgage is, but what we're seeing, unless the NADA can get something approved, would be that floor plan interest is not a mortgage per se, the way it is. Perhaps, if we're lucky, the NADA will get something across. Big thing to realize, if the loan is totally forgiven, that this will not be taxable income. So you won't be taxed on it. The manufacturers, we're aware of 3 of them so far, have issued some guidance on how to account for this on your dealer financial statements. Initially, you will set this up as cash in your bank and offset with a loan. On the other side, when the loan is forgiven, and if it's fully forgiven, it's considered income for your books, but it's not taxable income, so it would go into other income. And that's so far the 3 manufacturers that have sent us guidance, that's pretty much the accounting treatment for that. If you're getting CPA prepared financial statements, you will see it as a line item in GAAP statements as income, as like term of a grant, and we'd be more accounted for something like that. Our firm is currently working on some language to go in financial statements for how would appear in GAAP basis financial statements. But again, the bottom line is this is not taxable income if the loan is forgiven and you meet all the requirements for it being forgiven. If it's not forgiven in its entirety, if the loan is clawed back, then that goes back, reduces your loan balance and your cash will get clawed back. If it is not forgiven and it has to be amortized, then it'll be treated just as any other type of loan on your books for both tax purposes and financial purposes and on your dealer statement. Next slide, please. Some of the ideas we've seen, some of our clients during this time, especially those that have kept most of their staff intact. This is a really good time for technicians to become certified in other areas. So they can take some courses. So let's say if it was more of a transmission tech, they might become more certified in electronic harnesses or another aspect of working on vehicles. If they're upgrading, they want to upgrade their technician status, this is a good time to do that as well. And then for some multi-dealer groups that might have a lowered staff for a period of time, learning, maybe become certified in different types of manufacturer brands as well. So this is a really good time for that. This is also a really good time to start mining your customer database, culling through it, making sure it's current, looking for lost souls for both vehicle sales and service sales, and mining that data as well, and start approaching customers you've had in the past that you no longer have. And another part of that for service sales would be looking for customers that haven't come in for the recalls. And if you can look at your parts inventories and see what you have that would have been for recall parts, and look at them compared to customers that didn't come in for the recall parts, and start trying to make appointments from there and upselling from that endpoint as well. It's also a really good time to look at your parts systems and for ordering, making sure they're in tune with what you expect to see going forward. If you're deficient in any parts or too high in stocking other parts, this is a good time to start tweaking your parts ordering system and getting it in balance for what you expect to have and what you think you could sell going forward in a short term. It's also a really good time to start conducting virtual tours of the vehicles you do have in stock to get them sold virtually. We have a lot of clients who's the salespeople going into vehicles and with their cell phones and taking videos of the vehicles and certain aspects of what makes that vehicle special, and cleaning the vehicles as well and getting them in shape for sale. Another good idea we've seen some of our clients do is this is a really good time to start looking at the ROI on your advertising expenses and seeing if you're getting the ups that you want, especially in this virtual society, and using social media and seeing if you're getting the ROI on certain social medias, which gives you best ROI, it gets you most ups, interest in vehicle sales, what kind of pictures are generating more interest and things like that. So really take a good in-depth look at what your advertising is going on for your vehicle sales, and as well as service too, if you're advertising service as well. It's also a good time to review all your expenses, except attorney and accounting fees, of course, but looking to see if you're getting ROI on all of your expenses, and if you have duplicate costs that you can shave down, or if there's vendors that you might need to, they're not giving you the satisfaction you need, or other types of expenses you're incurring, look at those expenses as well. We had a lot of clients do this back in the old days of 2008. This is another really good time to do that. This is also a really good time to train your accounting department. The business is not quite as crazy. You're not experiencing the volume. So this is a good time to train your accounting department as well. Cross-train in the different desks, especially in case you lose somebody in the accounting department for some unfortunate reason. You're able to have somebody else step into that desk and make sure that you're not going to miss a beat as well. Or if you have to work on a reduced staff for some reason, they can take over other desks. If you're in a multi-dealership environment, you might be able to have one accountant in your accounting department work on one aspect in one dealership, and then work and help out in another aspect in another dealership. So cross-training, this is a really good time to do that too while you have some downtime. Next slide. Some ideas we've seen some of our clients doing now with some really good results have been an email blast for customers where their lease terms are ending or approaching soon. There are some programs out there with some manufacturers to draw in early turn-ins of leases. So this is a really good time to mine that database, bring customers in. So when it's time the lease term's coming up or you want to pull them in early, then this is a good time to start mining that database well. And if you've already got your processes down for selling virtually, this is a really good time to do that. Start mining your leads that you can using the internet and maybe training other people that don't have the experience in sales to try to get them trained to start prospecting leads as well. We talked about the recall items before. Look at your decline service or for recommended service for customers in the past year or so. Maybe start launching some deep discounts or giving coupons, matching competitors' prices, using the free pickup and delivery that we're seeing a lot of now as well. But start going through those service files, and anywhere there's declined service or you had recommended service because of pricing and it was declined because of pricing or time, this is also a really good time to do that. We've had a number of clients that actually had some remote delivery type service vehicles. I don't know if I'd recommend oil changes and things in customers' driveways, but perhaps doing some other type of service work at a customer's place of residence might, if you have the capability of doing that, we've seen some clients doing that as well. We have some other clients that have large used vehicle sales. They're really good at that. They're creating their own service programs to bring customers in for recommended service and using the same things you would for warranty work and recommended service. Go out and bring the customer's vehicles to the dealership for service and then deliver them back. So same things you would maybe do for new vehicles, you do for used vehicles as well. And it's a great way to mine your units in operation. And if you've got the mileage, this is a really good way to start recommending service for used vehicles as well. Let's talk about some cash flow ideas on the next slide. Because a lot of the DMV offices are also working on reduced staffing or remotely as well. So we're seeing a slowdown in the turnaround of title work. And this definitely is going to have an immediate impact on your cash flow. If you have the technology now to automate that process, make sure that you have got your own processes down so you don't slip up or you miss uploading information and things like that to the DMV offices. Because if you are missing something with the increased demand on the DMV offices with the short-term problem with the staffing these offices, it could severely increase turnaround time as well. So really monitor your processes and dealing with the DMV offices. Same thing is going on with indirect finance companies. They're working on reduced staff or remote as well. So when you're uploading data to your indirect finance companies, make sure that's complete, ready to go, and be a cashable contract to get to the indirect finance companies. They are also suffering the same problems the dealerships are. They might have a reduced inflow because sales are so down, but you also have to remember they're working differently than they're accustomed to working as well. So they're much slower as well. So if you have a bunch of steps in a contract, make sure they're all included in there. Examine your processes with your getting your packets and billing packets up to the finance companies. If you have some of your finance companies that aren't e-contracting now, this is probably not a good time to increase their volume and maybe try to shift as much as you can to the indirect finance companies that are capable of working remotely and capable of e-contracting quicker as well. Other things are working with your vendors, what we call vendor capital. And we already know some of the DMS systems are coming through and deferring payments as well for a few months. Not all of them are doing that. So the ones, if you have a DMS provider that's not offering deferred payments, I would contact them as well. It's a significant expense for most dealerships. And also, this is a good time to look at, are you utilizing every aspect of that DMS system that you need to? Because if you're going to start getting tough in negotiations, and Scott's going to help us with that, talk about that a little bit, this might be a good time to renegotiate some of your contracts as well. And if there's parts of the system you're not using, then it might be a good time to decline that service or get rid of those in the contracts. Another thing we're seeing too, advertising costs are getting a lot different. They're coming down. But one thing to look at now, if you're not on a long-term contract and you're some short-term contracts, go for a pay-for-performance type arrangement. So if instead of just paying media or creative type ads, pay for performance. Let's see what kind of ups they generate or sales they generate. And maybe it's better to pay a premium for sold vehicles and sold service than it is just paying for outright media or something like that. So this is also a good time to review your advertising expense as well. Let's also take a good look at your parts inventories. You have slow moving parts, what can be wholesaled, and start mining the smaller service providers in your market area to see if you can wholesale some of your parts as well. And just get your inventory right size where it needs to be. So that's another way to look at generating your cash flow. So next slide and see what's next. We're gonna move right into Scott, who's gonna talk about working with distressed creditors. Scott?
Thanks, Ken. Nice to remotely meet everybody. I'm hearing a little feedback. Oh, now it's working. Thanks. What I want to talk about is obviously what's set forth here in the slides that we'll cover, but take a step back before we move forward. So in general, for about 30 years, all I have done is represent borrowers and in their negotiations with lenders and or various other creditors. And the key and the goal of what we do is try and what you'll be doing potentially with folks you owe money to is in a situation where you're going to have to vary from the payment terms, what will that negotiation look like? What are some of the opportunities and what are some of the pitfalls? And so I'm going to go through in general what I've seen in my experience in negotiating with pretty much every type of creditor and pretty much every type of client of mine, what I've seen in these situations. And obviously, if you have questions throughout, just put them in and we'll try and answer them. And so the starting point of the negotiation with the lender or with any creditor is understanding the critical agreements. I've represented a couple of auto dealers in my time, probably a dozen or so. Probably the largest was one called Lighthouse Toyota. I understand that you have your dealer agreement. You're going to likely have a floor plan arrangement that may or may not be related to the, let me turn my lights back on. 1 second. There we go. A floor plan arrangement that may or may not be related to the dealer, a loan agreement with potentially a third party and including mortgages, and then you'll have various vendor agreements with unsecured creditors. So all these negotiations are going to start with the contract, digging out the contract and looking at what the creditor's rights are upon default. If you miss a payment, if you're late with a payment, there are other general potentials for default. Some contracts have certain covenants, but in this environment, I think the key is going to be missing a payment. And so you start with looking at the agreement and at the rights that the creditor has upon default. And that's the first question, what can they do? And then you combine that with the importance of that creditor to your business and the importance of you to that creditor. And part A of that, the rights upon default, is kind of generally purely legal, and parts B and C of that the importance of them to you and the importance of you to them is more art than science. And so the idea is for you to get a jump start, figure out what the creditor can do, and do you care if they're still your creditor? And will they care if you're not with them? And so for an example, a dealer agreement's really important. If you have a license to sell a certain type of make a car and they pull that, you can't sell those anymore. And likewise, the floor plan arrangement, you can't force somebody to lend to you, and you can't force them to allow you to get more inventory under lot. And so those two are going to be really important. If you have your showroom and a place where you lease, again, fairly important. But then somebody who delivers, Coke to your vending machines or some other kind of unsecured creditor is not particularly important, and as important, I should say. And so as you review what the default provisions are and then kind of put into framework how important they are, then depends on what you can ask for. So let me go to the next slide, please. So let me tell you what I'm seeing in general in the marketplace, and then we can talk about what is a reasonable, fair request. And some of that's in the eye of the beholder. So right now I've seen banks like Seacoast and several others immediately come out of the box and offer a number of my clients a 90-day forbearance on payments. It's not a waiver. They're going to accrue it, but they got that. Several of my clients got that without asking. And you see certain commercials with finance companies offering that. Landlords have been a little different. A couple of landlords I know, and I represent a landlord who has a couple of hundred commercial properties. He immediately offered 2 months and put the rent on the end. Again, not a forgiveness, but the willingness to extend the lease for 2 months and give 2 months forgiveness. I have several landlords who are being pains in the backside and really difficult. And it just was in the news today, the landlord for an AMC theater in Palm Beach didn't give a damn about the COVID-19 and is seeking to evict AMC. One of my clients is a pretty large furniture dealer and has a location in Tampa. The landlord didn't budge. I have a client who is a large trucking company with a headquarters in San Francisco. And likewise, that landlord is just not budging. And we'll get to that in a second about then what can you do. But so I've seen landlords be very difficult, surprisingly so. Probably though because they have underlying loans on the properties that then you may be leasing. And so I think it's always fair to ask for a couple of months forbearance. It's certainly fair to ask for 2 or 3 months forbearance on a loan. For kind of generally the trades, again, I think you can get into payment terms with them. If they're people that you pay every 2 weeks or every 30 days and they deliver product, they are not going to be willing to go as long without some payment, but you may be able to stretch out a portion of the payments in return for them continuing to deliver. This last bullet point, when to hold and when to fold, is really an issue of trying to determine when in the course of the negotiations can you just not go any further, and when do you want to play chicken? And so, and part of that is if the creditor is asking for something that just can't be done. I've sat across from more than one banker and told them that they can yell all day at the tree to jump, but it's unlikely to jump. And so, determining when to hold and fold and what's fair is really kind of a combination of you getting with your CPA, your chief financial officer, you have one, and your attorney to determine what cash do I have available, who's most important, and then how do I spread it around. And so that's why I say you go back to the starting place. Who amongst your contracts, starting probably with either the dealer or the floor plan, is most important? And you start with that negotiation and see what's left over for the end. Because again, at the end of the day, I can fight off a landlord on a mortgage for a year standing on my head. But if your dealer cancels your license or your floor plan decides they don't want to put inventory on your lot anymore, you're essentially out of business, certainly with the dealer agreement. So you rank them in priority, you see how far your cash will go, and then you start the negotiations. And why it's critical to view this from a 10,000 foot perspective is if you just do them as people are hollering, as you deal with the squeaky wheel, and you don't see how much you have to deal with all of these folks, you may have spent money on the person who does the cleaning in your showroom that you should have used for your floor plan, because you can go without cleaning or hire somebody else to clean or use other employees to clean. And make it probably a bad example, but you get the idea that you got to look at the whole so that you can figure out how much money you have to give, and then you rank them. So that's the hold and fold in terms of those negotiations. If you'll turn to the next slide, and we'll spend some time on this one. So a part of this goes back to looking at the default rights with creditors. And so obviously I don't have any of the agreements you have in front of you, but having seen dealer agreements and floor plan lines, the key in those is who has the ability, what creditor has the ability to take an action without notice or with very little notice, and that then it can be irretrievable and something that you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So you start with the contract again, but in general, so, you know, a dealership agreement, your license, they're going to have a provision in there that if you default on payments to them, to the extent you owe a franchise fee or to the extent you have a licensing fee and you don't pay it, it will probably say within 10 days of notice and failure to cure, they can cancel it. And in that point in time, it's game over in terms of resuscitating that absent the consent of the dealer. And so you need to kind of make a flow chart of how much time you have and what their rights are in terms of termination. And so for example, the dealership agreement is one that I've seen with the Toyota dealer that I talked about and Southeast Toyota, where they just had the ability to stop selling and stop them from selling Toyotas. And so those folks are going to take the highest priority and they have those special rights. The landlord has an interesting right. So most leases will, again, upon a missed payment, give a period of time to cure. It's usually 5 to 10 days. And some of them say 5 to 10 days upon notice to you, and some of them just say 5 to 10 days. So you have to start with the agreement. And then after that period of time, they can have a couple of options. And the one that's most significant is to terminate the lease. And because a lot of things that if you just get your back against the wall and there's nothing else you can do, and a company files Chapter 11, you can preserve those rights. But for example, on a lease, if the creditor decides just to terminate the lease, then that's gone. So for example, that client of mine I told you about that has the furniture business, this creditor, this landlord in Tampa wants that property back. My client wants to keep it because it was one of his best selling, producing showrooms before all of this hit. So April came, he didn't want to pay the payment. I reached out to the landlord, asked for the standard 3 months forbearance. They said no. I asked for a 2-month forbearance. They said no. I advised my client not to make the payment. The day it was due with the grace period, the landlord sent the notice, said you got 5 days to pay it, or I'm going to terminate the lease, which is different than saying, I'm going to sue you and try and evict you. Suing to evict will take 30 days until they can get what's called a writ of possession and kick you out. Once they terminate, you have no longer, you're a holdover tenant at that point in time. And so in terms of hold or fold and options at impasse, I tell my client, if you want this location, you got to pay. And are you assuming that they will terminate and get you out? So that goes back to what I said before at the beginning. How important is the creditor to you, and how important are you to the creditor? Using this example, I know that this landlord, it's a big mall where this landlord has gotten rid of every other tenant because this landlord wants to knock the shopping center down and use it for another purpose. My client has the whole of the donut. He's sitting in the hole and has a purchase option, and he doesn't want to lose that. And so as to my client, that creditor is very important. And as to my client, he's not important at all. So that led to the decision he had to pay it, or he was going to lose the store. And again, if you don't have the money, that's another circumstance. But what I'm trying to do is make the point that you're going to have to rank the creditors and use the money as far as it can go and make some difficult choices. And so, for example, in that same business, that client had some vendors who ship furniture who get paid on time, and he's one of their biggest clients. So he didn't pay them because they're not going to stop shipping him furniture because they need him to keep buying. And so that's how he ordered what he would do until his CARES Act loan came in, which it did. Landlords can have special rights. Let's talk about what I like to call the evil empire, banks. I don't like banks. I used to be a banker before I went to law school, so I know my enemy, and I don't represent any banks. So I really don't like banks. But there are two different types. I hope we don't have any bankers on. There are two different types of options that they have. The one is very slow. If you have a mortgage, if you have a lien on furniture, fixture, and equipment, personal property, there's very little that a lender can do quickly. Okay, hi bankers, we'll see you at the deposition. There's very little they can do quickly. They can default, they can accelerate the loan, they can start charging default rate interest, and then they can sue. But again, in today's environment, I think standing on my head, I can buy a year till a foreclosure judgment. And all during that time, you can negotiate. The exception to that, and the bankers who are on will know this, is if you have your depository account at that bank. In that event, a bank immediately on default can freeze your account. They don't need a court order. They don't need your permission. They have that right, even if it's not in the agreement, because it's called a common law right of set off. If you think about it, the money that's in your bank account is not actually money. It's the bank's obligation to you, and you owe the bank money. And so the moment you default, if a bank wants to, they freeze your account. And then it's negotiating with a gun to your head. So typically, one of the first things I will say to my clients is, do you have another bank account where you don't have a loan? And if the answer is yes, start moving money immediately. And if the answer is no, you need to go find a bank where you don't have a loan and start putting money in there. Some of my clients will then say, well, hold it. I have this loan with the bank and it's a default if I don't bank with them. To which I say, it's a little bit like being pregnant. You already are. And so you're going to breach the loan agreement. You're going to miss the payment. A breach is a breach is a breach. So move the money. You can't negotiate if you don't have any oxygen. Sorry, banks. So that's something that sometimes creditors miss. Debtors miss and borrowers miss, and come to me after their account has been frozen. There's really little you can do at that point in time. So that is, if you take anything from my presentation today, it is, if you have your money at a bank where that you also are a borrower of, act ahead of time. And there are two ways that a bank can set off. The one is you get a loan from Wells Fargo, and that's where your depository account is. The other way is they can have what's called a control agreement. So if you have a loan from an entity that doesn't have a regular depository account, but they entered into an agreement with your bank where you deposit, it's called a control agreement. That bank will then lender will also have the right to tell your bank, freeze your money. So that's the number one. And then the number two part of this is to know what rights in the contract, whether it's a dealership, finance, lease, can trigger an automatic default that then will impact your ability to do what you do. And based on weighing all these factors, you'll determine who you can offer what to and what your options are. And then the last bullet point is your options at impasse. Again, the best thing to do is try and get a deal. It's cheaper, it is more certain. If you are at a place where you simply can't do what somebody who can threaten your business wants you to do, your options are hand them the keys. Sorry for the analogy in a car case, but literally hand them the keys and shut it down, or take a shot and file Chapter 11. My other free advice to you, and I don't know how many times I've seen this happen, is never, never, never file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They get filed for a corporation. They get filed all the time, and I have yet to have anybody tell me why, other than they went to an attorney that wanted a fee and didn't give them good advice. An individual files Chapter 7 bankruptcy because they get what's called a discharge, a fresh start. They get, their debts are discharged. Corporations don't get a discharge. So there's absolutely no point in a corporation filing a Chapter 7. And generally what happens is a Chapter 7 trustee gets put in place who then sues the owner for anything they can think of. And so if, as they say in the South, the dog just isn't going to hunt, you dissolve the company and you tell their creditors where they can pick up their stuff. So hopefully you never get to that. And I wish you good luck in negotiating and making requests. And I think that was the end of my presentation. It is. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. So I'll be talking on what's next and what's going on with the SBA and specifically what's going on with the payroll protection program. Now, I'm sure everyone here has known that the Senate just passed the bill for $484 billion and $310 billion of that for the payroll protection program. The House is supposed to be voting on that today, and these funds could be here as early as tomorrow. Now, the big difference is that 60 billion of that 310 billion is going to be set aside for those smaller lending facilities like your credit unions and community banks. And this is to try to offset and help those smaller businesses that don't have the bigger banking relationships and that missed out on that first round of funding. Another thing is too, is why the funds aren't here yet. Most banks have still been accepting applications. We as a firm have submitted quite a few applications this week. And one thing to note is if you haven't submitted or you have submitted but haven't received your funding yet, I wouldn't panic. And some red flags I would look for is, has the bank at least told you, hey, we have your documents, or yes, we've got your documents, you've been approved by us, we're just waiting on the SBA portal to open. You don't need to do anything else. just basically wait and see as soon as the SBA portal opens back up. Now, if you haven't heard anything from your bank and they haven't even let you know that you've received or that they received your documents, I would reach out to your banking relationship and ask, hey, you know, what do I need to do? Is there anything else I need to submit? Have you received my documents? And just make sure everything's ready to go. Because as soon as the doors open, it will be a charge to get the funds. And I'm assuming they'll probably run out faster than they did before. And one thing to touch on too is a lot of people have been asking, oh, you know, I only have employees working 20 hours or 15 hours. But so if they're only working that amount, how am I going to use up this whole loan on payroll? The whole goal of the program is to pay them like they are working normal hours or full-time hours. Think of it as phantom commissions or phantom flagged hours and pay them like that. And kind of what Ken touched on earlier is think about anything that they produce is just pure profit in your pocket, right? The government's already paid you to pay them to be there or for their full time. And that's probably the best way to look at it. Another big one that's come out, and we still need more guidance on this, but if you have both the economic injury disaster loan as well as the payroll protection program and how this would affect your forgiveness, if you have both, do not use that $10,000 loan advance of the EIDL towards payroll, because that will reduce the forgiveness on the PPP, then creating a $10,000 loan at 1%. And instead you could use the EIDL on other expenses that are allowable and just use all payroll on PPP. Next. Now, probably what everyone has been wanting to hear is about the loan forgiveness process. Hopefully there will be actual official guidance released soon, or like a third interim final rule that will help us and steer us more in the right directions. But what we do know are some of the key figures for the full forgiveness. And this is going to be 75% of the loan has to be used on payroll costs. And that is your gross wages, your group health insurance, that's the employer's portion, and state and local taxes. And then the 25% should be spent on non-payroll costs, which will be your rent, your utilities, that includes telephone and internet, as well as your interest on mortgages. So one thing to take into consideration when you're thinking about the 75%, say if I have a $100,000 loan and I only spend 50,000 of it and it's all on payroll, you might think, oh, I spent 100% on payroll. That's not how it's going to work. It's going to work as based off the total loan amount. So that would say, oh, I only spent 50% of my loan on payroll, and then it will not be forgiven. Next, the full-time equivalent calculation. So this one is a little bit weird. So as you can see below, the key dates to look at is the 2/15/19 to the 6/30/19. And the 1/1/20 and the 2/29/20. So how the guidance is written is that we can choose either one, and you want to take your average FTEs between both those periods and determine which one works best for you. It's still unclear if we're supposed to go as a weighted average or a monthly average, but as soon as guidance comes out, we can let you guys know. And the safe harbor rule, which it's going to be 2/15/20 is a hard date. So that will be your average FTEs that include, or the payroll that includes 2/15/2020. And that's what they consider the beginning of the downsizing period. And then the 4/27/2020, which is what they consider the end of the downsizing period. So that difference in FTEs is what you would be allowed to use as your safe harbor if you restore them by 6/30/2020. So to kind of make that a little clearer is, say you have a difference of 10 employees and your average FTEs for the covered 8 weeks is 20, and I restore all 10 jobs by 6/30/2020, I then can use 10 plus 20 for 30 full FTEs when considering my percent reduction. Or maybe you don't have any after that. Then for the salary and wage reduction, this one is going to be based off of your 2/15/2020, whatever they were being paid at 2/15/2020, and if they get brought back at 6/30/2020. Now, one thing to note is if it's a new employee and they were not with you as of 2/15/2020, they will not be considered as like a salary reduction. There's nothing to go off of. You don't need to go to the old employer and figure out what they were making. They just aren't considered in that. And another big date is the date your covered period starts. I know that was a little unclear with the first guidance. Now the SBA and the Treasury come out and said that in one of their Q&As that it's going to be the date that you receive the funds as the start date for your covered period. You can go to the next slide. So here are some of the common questions that we've been getting on this whole program. So one of the big ones is, what do you do if I don't reduce wages at all, but I still can't cover the full loan? So you don't have enough rent or interest on your mortgages or utilities to cover the full loan amount. One thing that we would recommend to do is give a bonus out to the employees, right? It's going to help out with your payroll percent as of a loan, and you'll make your employees happy. But one thing to note is to ensure that they don't go over the capped limit of $15,385 for the covered period. And that's, until further guidance comes out, that's probably the best option. Another one is what if I can't rehire all my employees to reach my full-time equivalent limit due to unemployment wages being so high? We definitely get that one a lot. One thing to do is, if you fall under the first question, offer those employees time and a half, give them some incentive to come back, let them know that they will not be making this much on unemployment for very long. Unemployment only lasts so long. And also let them know that unemployment doesn't cover, retirement benefits or group health insurance, which also is a payroll cost that's allowable under the loan for you guys. So if you didn't offer it before, maybe offer it now, and you can use it as eating up part of your loan and give them better incentive to come back. Another one would be, it doesn't always have to be like if you had John Smith working for you and now he's on unemployment, you can go grab, Fabio, and he still counts. It's not like it has to be the exact person to replace them. So what is a full-time equivalent? So this basically is just, there is no true guidance yet from the SBA if they're going to follow exactly what like the ACA says is, but what the ACA says is that a full-time equivalent is anyone that works either 30 hours a week or 130 hours a month. And then how do part-time employees fall under that? So say if I have one employee that works 15 hours one week and another employee that works 15 hours that same week, they can combine to equal one FTE because they work 30 hours a week. So a recommendation I would have is take all your part-time employees, limit them to no more than 30 hours a week for each pay period, if you don't pay on a week basis, and take that total and divide it by 30, and that is going to be your full-time equivalents for just your part-timers for that pay period. And I know one thing that Ken touched on is if one employee works in two stores, so you have your controller working on store one, and then he also works at store two, they can count at as an FTE for both stores if they are working the hours in both stores. They're on payroll for both stores, and they get a W-2 from each store. I wouldn't just allocate their salary for the FTE purpose. On the salary side, that could be a different thing, and we should probably wait on further guidance for that. Now, the one I probably get the most is, why is the number of employees on my SBA payroll protection program application higher than my current employees? So the reason that is because it was supposed to reflect what your W-3 is more likely stating. Because if I say, okay, I'm applying based off my payroll being 10 million and I only have 45 current employees, that 45 employees did not make up that 10 million. You wanted to show how much, and what they wanted to see was how many employees made up that full 10 million. And I know a lot of people are scared that might hurt their forgiveness, but as you saw on the other slide, for the FTE calculation, it's based off 2 different time periods that you're allowed to choose from. So that form won't even be considered when you're looking at your FTE reduction. So you do not need to worry about that. And then another thing too, when it comes to the FTEs, I know a lot of people are trying to find creative ways to get FTEs. Just remember to not try to take too much advantage of this program. They seem like they're going to be very strict. They do have language in there that if you are deemed to misuse the funds or anything, that they can come after the shareholder or the partner, even though it's a non-personal guaranteed loan, that they can't come after you. And it does say that they're allowed to go after additional liabilities as well. I guess if we have any more questions, we can move on to those.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for your attention during this webinar. At this point, we'd open up the floor to any questions to our 3 presenters, if you have them, if you could submit them through the chat feature. Just to note as well, we will be submitting the recording of this webinar to everyone who attended once it's processed this afternoon. And we'll also be posting it on the Rosenfield and Company website and social channels. I don't currently see any questions in the queue. I had some that were asked, but I believe those were covered in the content. So if you did ask me a question prior to this and you feel like your question wasn't answered, this would be the time. Question to the group is, do we have worksheets that people can start using? Ken's shaking his head yes, but you're still on mute.
Yes, we do have some proprietary worksheets that Adam and his team have worked pretty diligently on. We are offering consultations to clients for those.
And another question, on the tax return, how will tax forgiveness be reported? Do we know that yet?
I have not seen anything on that other than it's not considered taxable income. So we've discussed it among ourselves as a firm so far, but it's not official answer at this point. But it is that it would be a book to tax adjustment to be shown on a tax return, but it will not be ending up as taxable income.
Okay, thank you. Another question is if we could shed some clarity on which part of the loan will be taken back if the full amount is not used.
Let Adam answer that one.
Can you repeat it one more time?
Yes. Can you clarify in which case part of the loan would be taken back if the full amount was not used? So in what event would the unused funds, can you clarify, I guess, more of the unused funds being removed from a bank account?
I would read your promissory note that you were given when you received the funds. But with the language that I've read in a few of them, and they've slightly varied per bank, is that they say they have access to do a direct debit of your account for the funds that were not used. So I would say that I would be prepared for them to be taken. I don't believe that there will be any penalties or anything like that as of yet. Once again, that's hopefully going to be cleared up when we get more guidance. But I would definitely have to read or tell you to read your promissory note, and that should tell you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question we have is, when do we expect to have clarity on the floor plan interest coverage?
Depends on how good NFPA is at lobbying.
That's a good question. There is nothing yet at the moment. I know the NADA is lobbying for that. I'm not sure if the various state ADAs are doing that as well. But as of this point, we've heard nothing positive at this point.
We have heard that.
Go ahead.
I'll say we have heard that guidance is supposed to come out, or hopefully is coming out by close of business tomorrow. So hopefully it would be addressed in there. If not, then we'll still be waiting.
Yeah, apparently some of the hookup is on the language of what a true mortgage is. Whereas even though a floor plan line is a line of credit, it's not necessarily a type of mortgage. It's a secured debt. It's not really a mortgage. So that's where the clarification needs to come through, is whether a secured debt on a revolving line of credit or not can equate to being equivalent to a mortgage.
Okay, great. Question for Adam. How is the employee count for the 8-week period calculated? Subpart of this is, if I average 50% of my head count for the first 7 weeks and then I'm at 90% in week 8, what percentage do I use?
So you're going to, depending on when your 8 weeks ends, right? So the safe harbor for the FTEs isn't until 6/30/2020. So if you are ending before then, so any loans that were probably funded around 4/16, 4/17, you're not going to hit the 6/30 safe harbor timeframe. So you would have to, they'll have to give us guidance if your loan ends before then, if I can use a safe harbor at 6/30 still. But I would err on the side of caution and say that you're going to have to have that as a full average. So it's going to be an average of the whole 8 weeks. So I guess it would be, what was that, 50%, 90%? You'd be at like a 75% FTE. Then, so it would be hard to know that without seeing when you're going to fall.
Okay. And maybe that's something we can address after the call with this particular person. Another question here. Does the employer portion of the FICA count as a payroll expense for this program?
No, it does not. It falls outside of it. But your payroll is still based off the gross wages. That amount, think of it coming out of your pocket. Okay.
Another question here in regard to the 25% coverage for mortgage interest, utilities, rent, is that a percentage of the PPP, or is it a standalone of the funded? Is it a standalone of the amount funded in the loan?
Unless they change it when additional guidance comes out, it seems like it's pretty clear that it's going to be based off of the amount funded, not on the amount used.
Okay. And to clarify, if you are short on your 75% in payroll, do you lose all the forgiveness or just some portion of the loan is clawed back? Do you want me to repeat that?
No, I'm reading it. I believe it's just a portion is clawed back, but I would have to go back and look at it again. And I can follow up with you.
Okay, perfect. At this time, I don't see any additional questions. We are definitely available if you have questions after this. You can find our contact information if you're not already current clients on rosenfieldandco.com. And on our staff page, you have our contact information there for all of us. If anything else, I don't see anything else coming through. So at this time, I would like to thank everybody for their attendance. Thank our presenters today, Ken, Scott, and Adam, for your time.
I would like to add just one thing real quick on that last question. If you fall short of the 75%, that's where you need to be monitoring the process of your pay the entire time through the 8-week period. And if you see you're falling short, that's a good time to come up with some creative ideas to increase your payroll. That's where some bonuses might come through, or paying some extra benefits or something like that would come through, and make sure that you hit that 75% threshold. Go ahead, Tara, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just saying, I think that wraps up today's presentation. And like I said, we'll get a recording out shortly for everybody.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.